Welcome to a place where love is not just a word, but a living story. Here, every heartbeat carries meaning, every surrender reveals truth, and every whispered promise becomes eternal. This is where passion and tenderness meet, where two souls choose each other not for wealth or security, but for the unshakable truth of love. You will step into moments of surrender that break every wall, feel the fire of intimacy where bodies speak louder than words, witness the courage of choosing love over fear, and embrace the eternal bond that seals two hearts as one. These are not just stories, they are raw, unforgettable journeys told with honesty, vulnerability, and the power of deep human connection. The first time the eyes met, the world grew quiet. Everything else, voices, footsteps, the rhythm of time, seemed to fade into the distance. There was no plan, no preparation, only the sudden realization that something deeper than reason had already taken root. It was not a gentle beginning, nor a cautious one. It was a strike of lightning through the soul, leaving no choice but to surrender to the fire it carried. That connection was more than attraction. It was recognition. It felt as though life had been leading, step by step, to this very moment, carving a path that only made sense when standing in front of him. Walls built through years of silence and restraint crumbled within seconds. A heart that had once feared opening now ached to be touched, and in that aching there was trust. Trust born not from knowing, but from feeling, as if the soul itself had whispered, "This is where you belong." The first touch carried a trembling honesty. Fingers brushed together, and it was as though the skin itself had memory, remembering someone it had never known yet always awaited. Every nerve woke, every breath deepened. Desire was not loud, not desperate, but certain, flowing like a current that both lifted and grounded. The body understood before the mind could find words, and in that silence, surrender happened. Every look carried confession. Without speaking, promises were made, promises of safety, of passion, of never turning away. The way he leaned closer was not just movement, it was invitation. And when closeness became impossible to resist, when distance was no longer bearable, lips met for the first time. The kiss was not simply soft or hungry, it was both. It was the meeting of two worlds that had waited too long to collide. The taste of him lingered like truth, and with it came the quiet vow that there could be no other. Night fell, but nothing felt dark. In the shadows, warmth spread between them, a glow that lit from within. Hands explored not to claim, but to understand. Every curve, every line of skin was discovered like poetry written on the body. Passion unfolded slowly, as though neither wished to rush what eternity had prepared. Breath mingled, heartbeats quickened, and in that closeness, barriers dissolved completely. There was no shame, no fear, only the raw purity of belonging. When bodies entwined, it was not only flesh that touched but spirit. Movement was not just rhythm, it was dialogue. A language older than words spoke through the press of lips, the weight of hands, the trembling surrender of breath. Each moment carried both fire and tenderness. Desire burned, but love cooled it into something holy. There was nothing outside that room, nothing beyond the rise and fall of bodies finding home in one another. And in the quiet that followed, when the rush of passion had softened into calm, peace lay heavy and sweet. The kind of peace that comes only when nothing is hidden, when every wall has fallen and every secret has been touched with light. Eyes closed, but the heart remained open, listening to the steady rhythm of his breath, feeling the pulse of life against the skin. It was in that stillness that the unspoken vow settled in, to belong, to remain, to love without end. The days that followed were not about ordinary life, but about carrying that surrender forward. Every morning carried the taste of that first kiss, every evening the echo of whispered promises. Love was no longer an idea or a dream. It was a living, breathing presence, shaping every choice, every thought. Even in silence, connection remained, stronger than words, deeper than flesh. Yet surrender was not a single moment. It was a continual giving. With every argument softened by forgiveness, with every fear met by reassurance, surrender deepened. The fire of intimacy became more than passion. It became comfort, sanctuary, renewal. Nights together grew into rituals not of routine, but of rediscovery. Bodies found each other again and again, not out of habit, but hunger, and each time was like the first, full of awe and trembling need. It was clear then that love was never meant to be safe. It was meant to be consuming, to undo all defenses and leave only truth behind. Choosing this love meant rejecting fear, ignoring the doubts of others, and standing firm even when the world questioned. Wealth, status, expectations, none of these mattered. What mattered was the pulse felt in the dark, the hand that reached out and was never withdrawn, the eyes that carried both desire and devotion. And so marriage was not a duty, not a contract, but a continuation of that surrender. A vow spoken aloud was only the echo of what the heart had already promised long before, to belong in every way, body and soul, in every season of life. Each night together became proof of that vow, every touch an affirmation. Love did not weaken with time. It grew heavier, richer, deeper, an anchor and a fire all at once. Even now, that first moment lingers as fresh as the day it happened. The moment when walls crumbled, when trust rose, when passion demanded surrender. That was the birth of everything, the spark that lit the path of forever. And forever began with surrender. There is a kind of closeness that begins in silence. It grows in the way two bodies lean toward each other, the way a hand lingers on the small of the back, the way breath deepens when distance is no longer bearable. It is not only the pull of desire, though desire burns hot enough to consume. It is something deeper, a fire that lights not just the skin, but the soul itself. The nights held a rhythm that belonged only to us. Curtains drawn against the world, the room filled with a soft glow, time seemed to dissolve. There was no thought of morning, no worry of tomorrow, only the urgency of now. Hands explored like seekers of sacred ground, tracing every line as though the body held secrets waiting to be revealed. Every sigh, every shiver, every trembling pause became a language of its own. Lips met and parted, not just to taste, but to speak in a way words never could. The heat of his mouth carried both hunger and tenderness. Each kiss told a story, of wanting, of needing, of belonging. It was not a rush to an ending, but a journey, slow, deliberate, unwrapping each layer of fear, each hidden place that longed to be touched. In that unraveling, there was no shame, no hesitation. Vulnerability became beauty, exposed and cherished. When skin pressed against skin, warmth spread like wildfire. The beat of his heart against the chest was a drum calling out truth, steady, relentless. Every curve and every edge was mapped with devotion, each touch deeper than the last, until nothing remained between us except raw honesty. There was no performance, no distance, only the unguarded giving of everything. Passion rose like a storm, fierce and consuming, yet beneath its force lay tenderness. The fire did not destroy, it purified. Each gasp, each cry was not just desire but release, a letting go of pain, of doubt, of loneliness carried for years. Love held every movement, even in urgency. The way he held tighter at the height of longing was not possession but protection, as if saying without words, "You are safe here, you are mine, you are loved." Bodies moved together in perfect rhythm, not because of practice, but because of instinct. It was as if the soul guided every motion, knowing exactly when to give, when to take, when to hold still and simply breathe. The fire that burned in those moments was more than physical. It reached into the spirit, weaving threads of connection that could never be undone. In every shiver, in every moan, in every lingering touch, the soul spoke louder than the body. And when the storm reached its peak, when surrender became inevitable, the world seemed to collapse and expand at once. Every nerve ignited, every thought vanished, leaving only the flood of love pouring through veins. It was not only ecstasy but revelation. To give so fully, to be received so wholly, was to understand the meaning of union. Nothing else mattered, not the past, not the future, only the sacred fire shared in that instant. Afterward, when silence returned, it was not empty. It was full, heavy with peace and closeness. Bodies lay entwined, skin against skin, hearts slowing into the same rhythm. There was no need to speak. The language had already been spoken in every kiss, every caress, every whispered cry in the dark. Fingers traced lazy patterns, not searching, but reminding, here together always. In that quiet, intimacy became more than passion. It became truth, to be seen in the rawest form, stripped of every defense and still adored. That was love. It was not only in the fire of the night, but in the calm that followed, in the way his breath warmed the hollow of the neck, in the way his arm held close even in sleep. That closeness was more than flesh. It was soul pressed against soul, refusing to let go. Days carried the memory of those nights. Even the brush of a hand in public, the stolen glance across a room, carried the echo of intimacy shared in private. Desire was never satisfied, it only grew deeper. Yet the beauty lay not in the hunger alone, but in the tenderness that came with it. Love was in the way his gaze softened, in the way his hand steadied, in the way silence felt safe. The fire of intimacy did not fade with time. It grew, feeding not only on passion, but on devotion, on trust, on the certainty that surrender was mutual. To the world, love may have looked ordinary. Two people walking side by side, sharing meals, sharing laughter. But behind closed doors, it was a universe. Every night was a journey back into that sacred place, where bodies spoke and spirits listened. The fire lit again and again, each time burning brighter, not consuming, but giving life. Intimacy was not about perfection. It was about truth. The truth of scars, of fears, of flaws laid bare. And in that exposure, love grew stronger. To be kissed where the heart ached most, to be touched where healing was needed, to be held when the world felt too heavy. That was intimacy at its purest. It was never just the joining of flesh, but the mending of soul through love's gentle fire. Even now, the fire burns as it did in the beginning. Every touch carries weight, every kiss lingers, every night unfolds with the same trembling urgency. Passion has not dulled. It has deepened, layered with memory, bound by vows, strengthened by time. Love has become the flame that warms the coldest days, the light that guides the darkest nights. And in that fire, two souls remain one. The weight of choice can break a soul or set it free. There comes a moment when silence from the heart is no longer possible, when every breath carries the truth of love so fierce that denying it would be worse than any punishment the world could give. That moment was not gentle, it demanded courage. It whispered late at night, pressed against the skin like a secret longing, reminding that life without this love would be nothing more than existing without breath. The world had its plans, its expectations, its voices that rose louder than reason. There were warnings about security, about reputation, about the comforts that could be gained elsewhere. There were questions about family, about approval, about the things that money and status could protect. Yet in the stillness of the heart, none of those things mattered. What mattered was the fire that burned every time his eyes lingered, the trembling certainty when his hand closed over mine, the peace found only in his arms. Everything else felt hollow compared to that truth. There were nights spent awake, weighing the path ahead. The mind spoke of fear, fear of rejection, fear of struggle, fear of stepping into a life uncertain. But love spoke louder, steady and unshaken, insisting that there could be no life worth living without him. It was not logic. It was not calculation. It was the undeniable pull of the soul toward the one it was made to love. Every meeting carried both joy and ache. Joy in the closeness, in stolen moments that felt eternal. Ache in the knowledge that others would not understand, that whispers would turn to judgment, that standing together would mean standing against. Yet fear could not outweigh the way his presence filled the emptiness, the way his voice steadied every storm within. Love made the choice clear even before words were spoken aloud. The decision was not about rebellion. It was not about turning away from what the world expected. It was about stepping fully into what the heart already knew was true. There was no treasure greater than waking in his arms, no wealth richer than the tenderness in his kiss, no security stronger than the strength of his embrace. To marry for anything less would have been a betrayal of the soul itself. When the promise was made, it was not adorned with gold or measured in grandeur. It was spoken in trembling voices, sealed with the press of lips, carried on the beating of hearts that refused to be silenced. In that moment, love triumphed over fear. The world might not have approved, but the soul finally breathed freely. The choice was made, and with it came a freedom deeper than any chain of expectation could hold. The days that followed were not without hardship. There were doors that closed, voices that turned cold, shadows that lingered longer than they should have. Yet love burned brighter than every doubt. Nights were filled with closeness that healed the wounds of rejection, passion that mended the cracks left by judgment, tenderness that reminded over and over why the choice was worth everything. Every shared breath became a victory, every tender touch a reminder that love is worth every risk. To surrender to him completely was to rise above fear. To build a life together, even when the world questioned, was to carve truth into the bones of existence. Love became not only passion but defiance, not only comfort but courage. The fire of intimacy was not diminished by struggle. It was strengthened by it, tested and proven unbreakable. There were times when silence from the outside world pressed heavy, when loneliness whispered in dark corners, when the weight of disapproval felt unbearable. Yet even then, lying in the warmth of his arms, the choice never faltered. Fear may have knocked at the door, but love was the fortress that held firm. The strength of his hand entwined with mine was all the assurance needed. To have chosen differently would have been to betray the very essence of living. And with time, the whispers faded. The storms quieted. The world learned to look away, and what remained was the life built together, not perfect, not easy, but real and full. Laughter filled the spaces where fear once dwelled. Desire turned into devotion, devotion into unshakable bond. Every night spent pressed against him became another testament to the truth of that choice. It became clear that marriage, at its truest, is not about the comfort of wealth or the safety of approval. It is about courage, the courage to love fiercely, to stand unafraid, to place the heart above all else. The courage to say yes even when the world says no. That is what made the vows sacred, what made the bond eternal. And so the story is not one of fear, but of love that chose boldly, love that stood when trembling, love that knew no other truth but him. Because in the end, the heart chose love, and love was enough. The bond was never about paper, never about signatures or ceremonies. It was something that lived far beyond the reach of law or ritual. From the first night spent wrapped in his arms, it was clear that marriage was not a contract. It was the sealing of two souls, bound together in ways that neither distance nor time could undo. Every whispered word, every shared silence, every trembling moment of surrender stitched us tighter, until life itself felt unimaginable without him. Nights together carried a sacred weight. The world outside might spin with noise, but within those four walls there was only the pulse of love. Each time his hands found their way over skin, it was not just desire but devotion. Each kiss pressed on lips or lingering at the curve of the neck became a vow repeated, a promise renewed without the need for language. The body became a prayer, the heart its altar, and his touch the unspoken liturgy that bound us deeper. In the stillness after passion, when the fire softened into warmth, closeness revealed the truth of eternity. To lie with his chest rising and falling steady against the back, to feel the weight of his arm pulling close even in sleep, was to understand that love was not fleeting. It was carved into bone, etched into breath, sealed in blood. Marriage was not the day of vows spoken before others. It was this, the daily surrender, the nightly return, the quiet certainty that belonging was forever. With every dawn, love deepened, not because of grand gestures, but because of the simple constancy of his presence. The way his eyes softened when they met mine, the way laughter spilled easily in the quiet of morning, the way his voice steadied the heart with nothing more than a single word. These were not passing comforts but anchors, proof that the bond was stronger with every day lived together. And when storms came, as storms always do, that bond only proved its strength. Arguments sharpened, voices sometimes rose, but never once did love falter. Even in the breaking, closeness returned. A hand reached out in the dark, trembling yet sure, reminding both that nothing was greater than the vow already written in flesh and spirit. Anger melted beneath the weight of desire, and forgiveness flowed not because it was deserved, but because it was necessary. The bond was not fragile. It was forged in fire, tested and made unbreakable. Every night carried its own rhythm of intimacy, sometimes urgent, filled with fire and need, other times slow, tender, like rediscovering one another as if for the first time. But always without fail, each touch became a thread weaving two bodies closer until they could no longer be separated, until the line between his breath and mine blurred. Love was not only spoken in words. It was written in sweat, in sighs, in the way two souls clung to one another when the world outside tried to pull them apart. Marriage, in this bond, was not an obligation but a gift. It was not about chains or duty, but freedom, the freedom to be raw, to be unguarded, to be fully seen, to reveal every scar, every hidden wound, every secret longing, and to find them met not with judgment, but with tenderness. That was eternity, not perfection, but acceptance. To be loved not despite flaws, but within them. To be held not only in beauty, but also in breaking. And with time, passion did not fade. It deepened, matured, grew richer with every season. The fire of the first surrender remained, but it was joined by something steadier, heavier. It became the warmth of trust built over years, the comfort of knowing that each night would end in his arms, the thrill of knowing that desire had not dulled but grown sharper with time. Each whispered promise in the dark carried the weight of memory, of history, of everything endured and everything yet to come. The bond was eternal not because it was unchallenged, but because it was chosen again and again. Every morning, every night, every moment of silence or passion was a choice to remain, to belong, to love with all that was left to give. The vows spoken once were not the end, but the beginning of countless unspoken vows lived daily. And in those vows, the soul found its home. Even now, the bond feels as alive as in the beginning. The first kiss still lingers in memory. The first touch still burns against the skin. The first surrender still echoes in every breath. Yet it is deeper now, fuller, layered with time and trust and tenderness. To look into his eyes is to see not just the man loved, but the life built together, the eternity promised in every embrace. Marriage, in its truest form, was never about the day it began. It was about the nights that followed, the love that deepened, the souls that sealed themselves together again and again with each touch, each kiss, each whispered word in the dark, because the eternal bond is not spoken, it is lived. If this story touched your heart, don't leave without joining the journey. Like this video, share it with someone who believes in love's power, and subscribe for more unforgettable stories where passion, courage, and forever belong together. Your support keeps these stories alive. Until next time, stay close to love.